Okay, so the question gives you the equation 6x plus 11y equals negative 17, which this equation is a linear equation, meaning it makes a straight line, and it's in standard form, which standard form is not super helpful when you're solving problems. You're usually going to need to rearrange it to slope-intercept. So basically, it says on the first question, which is part A, if y, so this is part A, if y decreases by 11 units, what is the corresponding change in x? So you're going to have to like pull from your knowledge from 8th grade algebra. And so basically, here's your thought process. I'm going to write my thought process over here. So we're going to let the change in y be written like this because that's how you write it. That little triangle means change in y. And we're going to let the change in x be written like this, change in x. That way we don't have to write change in y and like write it out. So it's going to be like triangle y means change in y, okay? Now, you know from 8th grade math that slope is the m, and it is represented by the change, oops, I didn't mean to put that, the change in y over the change in x. So if I wrote that out with these, slope is equal to the change in y over the change in x. So that's where that formula came from in algebra, like y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, because it's the change in y, so you're taking your y's and subtracting over the change in x. Okay, we're not doing that right now. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you want to rearrange for what you need. So you're going to take this right here, and you're going to rearrange it for what you need. So let's go back to our question, and then we'll come back to our thought process. Okay, so we're dealing with slope, we're dealing with change in y's and changes in x's, because part A says, let me get my question that you sent me. It says if y decreases by 11. So they're basically giving you the change in y. The change in y is equal to a decrease by 11. That's straight from your question right here. So y decreases by 11. So if it's decreasing by 11, that's going to be negative 11. So we have this piece. We need the slope, and then we can solve for the change in x, because it's giving you the change in y, and it's asking for what would the change in x be. So what is the change in x if the change in y is negative 11? Okay, well, to solve this, we need the slope. So this form of the equation is not going to help us. We need to go rearrange it to y equals mx plus b so that we know the slope. So I'm going to go do that. I probably should have done it above this, but whatever. So I have 6x plus 11y equals negative 17. And then I'm going to rearrange it to this form, because I need this piece right here for slope, so that I have this piece, and then I'll only have to solve for that piece. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 6x on both sides, so I have 11y equals negative 6x, minus 17, or plus negative 17. Divide everything by 11, and I'm left with y equals negative 6/11 x minus 17 over 11, which I really didn't need the y-intercept, I just need this piece. So I know the slope is negative 6/11, and I know the change in y is negative 11. So I can now plug it into this to solve for the missing piece. So you could do it all over here, or you could just go ahead and rearrange this for what you need. It's totally up to you, and I'll show you what I mean. So like I can rearrange this. This is called a literal equation because there's no numbers in it, but I can rearrange it to get what I need. So if I want to move this to this side, the opposite of dividing by the change in y is multiplying by the change in y. So I'm just going to show my work right here. So if I multiply by the change in x, that cancels out, and I can multiply by the change in x, and that tells me if I need the change in y, I can simply take the slope and multiply it by the change in x. So that's one thing, but I don't need the change in y. They gave it to me. So I need the change in x. So I'm going to take this formula and now solve for the change in x. So I'm going to rewrite that. So the change in y equals m times the change in x. So if I want to get the change in x by itself, because that's what I'm trying to solve for, then I would simply divide by m. That cancels out, and I have, and I'm going to write it from left to right, the change in x is equal to the change in y over the slope. So these are your two formulas right here, this one and this one. They're going to help you with each part of this, like this question. So basically you had to do this and then this to figure out each part of this question. So part A gives you the change in y is negative 11. It's asking for the change in x. So you're going to use this one because you're looking for the change in x. Okay, so I have the change in x is equal to the change in y, which they told us is negative 11, over the slope. Well, we know that the slope is negative 6/11. I'm going to put that in parentheses. So in your calculator, there's two ways you can put that in. You can either use alpha y equals and then put negative 11 over, and then put alpha y equals within that, negative 6/11, and that's your answer. Or you could have just done negative 11 divided by negative 6/11, but then you would have to put it in parentheses, and you're going to math fraction in, or you're going to get the same thing. So the change in x is equal to 121 over 6, and since it's positive, that means it's increasing, so it increases this much. So that's part A. So part B, C, and D won't take as long because you already did all the work for it. The slope's still negative 6/11. Okay, so let's go look at your next question. Change my pen color for part B. So B says if x increases by 2 units. So B is right here. If x increases by 2 units. So the change in x is increasing, so that means positive 2. Then what is the change in y? So we're looking for the change in y. So I'm going to use this one because I'm looking for the change in y. So the change in y is equal to the slope times the change in x. So the change in y is equal to the slope, which is, we already solved for it, negative 6/11, times the change in x, which they said is 2. So the change in y, multiply straight across, or we could just put it in our calculator, and that negative 12/11. Pretty sure it's negative 12/11, but whatever. Negative 6/11 times 2 is a negative math fraction. Enter negative 12/11. Okay. Since it's negative, this is decreasing by by 12/11. So there's A, there's B. Let's go look at C. Let me find the question. So C says if x decreases by 3 units, so that's the change in x, decreases, that means it's negative 3. Now we're looking for the change in y. So what is the change in y? Well, the change in y, I'm going to use this one again. So the change in y is equal to the slope times the change in x. Okay, so the change in y is equal to, we already know the slope, it's from up here. The slope is negative 6/11 times the change in x, which is negative 3. And if you multiply straight across, that's 18/11. It's positive. So the change in y is increases 18/11. We'll come over here and do the last part, which is D. Okay, D says if y increases, so the change in y is positive because it's increasing 6. So we're looking for the change in x. So that's what I'm looking for. So your formula is going to be the change in x is equal to the change in y over m. So the change in x is equal to 6 over the m, which is negative 6/11. So I'm going to put that in my calculator. So I have 6 over negative 6/11, and that's negative 11. We'll make sure that's right. So that's decreases by negative 11. Okay, so sorry, somebody came in my room. So that would be your answer to D, but I want to make sure I put that in correctly. Yeah, that's right, because that would cancel out. Okay. The other way, like if you didn't want to find these, then you could just use, where did it go? This formula right here and plug it in and then just solve your equation. So like, you didn't have to do all this ahead of time. I just feel like it's easier if you're going to do like 20 parts to a question to go ahead and have that done for every single question. So anyways, you need to memorize slope is m equals the change in y over the change in x, and then you can rearrange this to get whatever you need. Okay.